When we look at the bucket analogy, if we look here at our little graph, here's regulation and this is time. Obviously when we're babies, infants and toddlers, we have nothing in our bucket, okay? So these little arrows indicate like how much water would be in the bucket. And as we come up, we start to see here toddler into our toddlerhood. So we're looking at that sort of, we'll go through each one individually, but you can start to see we fill the bucket up a little bit more. And then something happens in between the toddler and preschool years. But you can see the gap between the bucket arrow here and the bucket arrow here is huge. There is a huge pouring, hopefully, at this time into our self-regulatory buckets, because as toddlers go into preschool years, they develop, well, we'll talk about what they develop, but obviously they develop higher language skills, motor skills. There's some teaching that can start to happen in the preschool era. And so there's a massive leap of growth here in self-regulation, hopefully. Now, back to our neurodiverse kids, if you work with those in your practice, you'll know that that doesn't happen there. You don't see that. And that's the whole reason that they need extra support. And that's the whole reason in schools, I was in EA for years. That's why I worked with these kids, because they needed individual caregivers. We didn't call it this at the time because we didn't know it, but what we were is we were their co-regulators, no matter what age they were, because they actually did not have any regulatory capacity whatsoever unless somebody was supporting them. That bucket evens out a little bit here between preschool and childhood. This is sort of elementary years. It doesn't really get a big hit again. You can sort of see here's childhood, sort of think elementary into adolescence. Now, you don't really see much of that bucket sort of pouring. It's filling. It's just not like fire hosing like it does down here. But there's one more time now in our life that fire hose is supposedly, you can think back to your own lives, how much this worked in your time in this life. But between adolescence and young adulthood is probably, you can see the gap there is bigger almost than toddler and preschool, that in our self-regulatory buckets really get full, hopefully at this time in our lives with our people around us. Number one, because there's various people in our lives. Usually there's teachers, coaches, sometimes it's our friends' parents, it's our parents. So there's actually more of a bigger support system around us at this time, hopefully. And when you see these big circles, this is where the regulatory bucket and the sophistication of our self-regulating skills really can grow if somebody has been pouring them in and turns the fire hose up at that time. These are the two times in somebody's life that if you have been fire hosing in, that self-regulatory capacity through certain skills that you've given and ways to co-regulate, we really see young adults move into self-regulation nicely into their adulthood, because now we're into young adult to adults. And the idea is that by the time we are into our adulthood, so we're thinking like 28 up, 30 up, sort of is the age of adulthood versus young adulthood, is the full bucket really is, they said, is about 80 to 90%. That there's still times in our lives that we're going to still rely on somebody to help us regulate through something, or we're not able to, if you've ever been even in your practice or even in this group, sometimes you just don't see things clearly. That's how we would describe it as an adult, right? Like I can't see the forest through the trees, or I can't see it clearly, or I just can't wrap my brain around it. It's those things that we would still rely on somebody for 10 to 20% of our life, but it wouldn't be something we need all the time, and that we stay regulated ourselves, that we're able to self-regulate most of our time into adulthood. So I just have a little visual here for a picture, obviously, of what we're pouring into it. So co-regulation, I just liked the meaning of it all through this study, which was the art of caregivers providing just enough support for a child to manage their emotions. Now, they do focus obviously a lot on young children in this study, but I could split that up and just say the art of caregivers or practitioners providing just enough support for anyone to manage their emotions, because unmanaged emotions is a dysregulated nervous system. If you look at when you talk about stress in your office with people, or they say they are stressed, or you observe stress What you're observing is somebody who cannot self-regulate. They're overwhelmed in their life or they're shut down. That is a lack of self-regulatory capacity. And it shows up now in a bunch of health problems. The idea into the bucket is that you're pouring, or the child is pouring, or the adult is pouring in the parent early on in childhood, and this becomes your regulatory bucket for life. And as the abilities increase, supposedly, well, the parents should be decreasing this over time.